Hi, welcome to Voluntary. I'm Corey.
And I'm Braun.
And we're starting a series on how blank would look like in a voluntary society. Today our topic is sports. There's a lot of criticisms about sports and how they're entangled within government. And there's a lot of criticisms that say they won't exist, they would exist in a free society, professional sports would be a bad industry. And Ron, you've probably heard these criticisms. What do you think about some of them?
There's definitely some valid criticisms, Corey, that when it comes strictly to professional sports, that they're propped up and subsidized on the taxpayer's dime. And not everybody loves sports. I mean, in fact, some of our viewers maybe that they're referred to it as sports ball, referring to all sports. They don't know the difference between football or basketball because they just don't care. And there's probably something maybe inherently immoral about that, and a valid criticism against, the public subsidization of sports. But so there's some valid questions to be asked. Would pro sports thrive in a completely voluntary society where taxes weren't used to subsidize some of these entertainment activities such as sports?
Yeah, there's definitely the stadium subsidies is definitely one. You know a little bit about sports.
Yeah, particularly I'm a big 49ers fan, San Francisco 49ers. They've recently built a new stadium called Levi Stadium. And it's pretty interesting as you watch some of these negotiations for these stadiums to where there's definitely some cronyism that happens in there. They threaten to leave the city if the city doesn't comply and help them out. And in fact, my team moved from San Francisco at Candlestick Point down to the city of Santa Clara because Santa Clara was willing to grant them the money to help build the stadium. While the proposal did technically not raise taxes on the residents there, it increased hotel taxes as well. So there was a form of taxation there for the Santa Clara Stadium Authority, in order to pay for the loan they took out. It was actually $850 million, while I think the NFL only pitched in something like $250 million to the loan. So that cost the city of Santa Clara alone their ability that much money.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not direct taxation.
About $600 million and somewhat.
Yeah. So that's on them I don't even live anywhere near there. Maybe I'll go see a game and maybe I will pay that hotel tax when I go to visit. But largely I get the benefit, free for my team to play in a new stadium and be able to watch that despite their, atrocious record this year. But
the funniest thing about these stadium subsidies is no economists agree with it. It's crazy to see this, but it's like 97% of economists agree on this one idea that subsidies should not go to pro sports teams, and that these things should not be happening because they end up getting propped up and people they go for these things, and then even people say local economies will be improved, and that they want to improve the local economy. They're not really actually improved because a lot of the players come from out of the state, out of the area, and then they go home during the summer and they spend all their money out of the state. And so there's no reason for them to actually be propped up in any way, shape, or form. That there's huge problems with it, even in a lot of the more liberal economics areas.
No, that's very true. Is that they're always sold to the public as they're gonna really boost economy. They're gonna enrich and re-enliven maybe some areas that have fallen into disrepair. Especially stadiums often get proposed for the more downtrodden areas of a city, saying that they'll revitalize them and bring in new business, and they'll be good for the small businesses that exist there. But like I said, economists have studied it. They've shown that. The evidence shows that it doesn't, especially with how extravagant stadiums are getting. They're becoming all enclosed areas to where the bar, the vendors, everything in the stadium. So and all that revenue goes to the NFL. It actually in some cases, takes money away from local businesses and things. So it's definitely an interesting exercise to wonder, would these even stadiums in professional sports, would they even exist without the state supporting them and the government propping them up? There's definitely been some commentators on the internet who said that they wouldn't, and it couldn't thrive. Pro sports would go the way of the dinosaur, that they'd be something that wouldn't survive in a completely voluntary society. What would be your response to that, Corey?
I would say there's things that they're discounting. I always would say there's revenues that professional sports, number one, the players might take a pay cut if that happens. That would be the only thing that I think would happen, is that there's so much money already going to the players in most of the professional sports we have in the United States, whether it be, and so they get that money, and they would probably have to take a pay cut of some form to be able to help pay for the stadium again, but it would have to happen just so they could be around, and the negotiations would have to go through that, but I'm sure the pay cut would probably come into play because the owners want to pay for a stadium on top of paying for players. But once a stadium's paid off, you never know how long that'll be and how long that'll take, but I don't think it's gonna be, that criticism to me is not as valid because there's still so much revenue that goes into professional sports that it would be hard, even with paying for a stadium, to not make a profit in a lot of markets.
It's interesting to say that. I definitely see that working for, basketball. It's not a very high-risk sport. But football, there's a lot more players in football. I think there's probably a lot more overhead going through, and there's actually that danger and risk. What is your response to that? Because that's been a criticism level of football as well, is that it's high-risk sport too, so that's why you actually need the government involved there, is to protect us from these things and to make rules and to ensure that it's an activity that is safe, and then also that there's that money there negotiated for when players do get injured, and that's a ever-increasing cost with a sport like football, but maybe not with other sports. What would be your response to maybe that criticism?
Well, I think there's definitely some barriers to entry right now. I think the government definitely has playing some favorites with these professional sports leagues. I mean, the NFL, up until a year ago, was considered a nonprofit entity, which it very much is not a nonprofit entity. It is a profitable, very, very profitable entity.
Oh, for sure.
And so there's definitely, you can definitely see some favoritism that's been going on, especially with the NFL. But there's definitely things that you can look at and you can see, well, there's barriers to entry, but if there weren't these so many barriers to entry that these city governments put more restrictions on what teams get places, and it makes it really hard for the smaller markets to survive, and that unless you go to a smaller market, you're not going, and you don't want to be part of the NFL and all that, you're not going to be able to make a survival because your regulations are so high, and
That is pretty interesting. I think I would definitely agree there. The costs are driven up. I mean, you talk about barriers to entry. Sometimes this is a little more subtle, I think. It's more along the lines that cities often grant one team or one industry, one sports group, they'll be like, hey, we're going to give you this land rent-free, tax-free. I mean, while that may not be a direct subsidy that, gets people really all fired up, but it also means that somebody else isn't privileged to that. So it grants them a competitive advantage to where they're not necessarily having to compete other ways. They've been granted that so-called monopoly to be in that city, to where I think in a free society we've kind of talked about this, and that maybe like New York and LA would probably have vastly more teams because obviously there's the demographics and the population there to support more teams, but the city chooses to only back one team or another there, and they grant that special monopoly privilege there through the tax breaks, through the free rent on the land and things like that.
Yeah, there's definitely ways that you would see more teams go into a closer geographic area, and they would play probably closer geographic areas just because it cuts down costs, cuts down travel costs. People can sleep in their own beds. It's way better. You'd play inner city football in New York City because you could probably support 4 or 5 teams there. A whole division of football could probably be played within New York, and same with LA in that area, and same with the San Francisco Bay Area. All the major population areas of the United States, there's just way more. But then you might have a team in Denver, maybe a couple teams in, maybe a team in Denver and a team in Utah and a team everywhere else throughout the United States, and you'd be able to compete. And they'd make it way more local, I think. I think local teams and all levels of different competition, because these barriers to entry of taxation and the free taxes and the stadium subsidies is a barrier to entry for any one of them. That these ones are getting their propped up, and then they can't pay the players as much because they're getting propped up by the government, and so so if another league wanted to come in and compete with the NFL to bring player contracts and players guaranteed contracts within the NFL to make it more competition wise, where they're able to pay players on, because the NFL does not have guaranteed contracts right now. And so there'd be a league maybe that pops up and says, hey, we're gonna offer you guaranteed contracts and guaranteed money, and you come to our league, we'll get you guaranteed money. Well, then they're competing for salaries, and they wouldn't have this monopoly over negotiation of salaries right now that currently exists.
So what I'm hearing, I kind of think, is what we've kind of settled on is that, yes, maybe there are some definite criticisms to pro sports as they exist today, and it probably is a valid criticism and prediction that they wouldn't necessarily exist how they exist today. The model would definitely be different in a voluntary society. Just like you pointed out, there'd definitely be competition that would come in and they'd shake things up by offering different things to both the consumers and the competitors and the participants, which I think would be actually make it more vibrant and healthy. I know we've talked about this a little bit, is that the European Soccer League operates things a little bit differently. You want to go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Atlantic.com, they have a great article on this. It's a sports paradox, because we in the United States, you think of the United States is way more free market and way better for the consumer.
That's what we say,
in general.
Like capitalism, we're the freest nation on earth and laissez-faire around here, but that doesn't seem to be the case when it comes to pro sports.
Pro sports, it's the direct opposite. It's a dog world, and it's a very interesting thing what European soccer gets. If we look at like how you compare salaries and how players are salaried throughout the world of soccer, there's a whole entire, some players are paid $60 a game or something around that, just to be able to pay for them to play just as a part-time gig in their life, that maybe they'll play every week and they'll go travel with the team, and it's just a side gig for them. And then it goes up to $30-40 million a year they're paid for it. And so they have guaranteed contracts in soccer, and these teams, you can have a team in a small city of 3,000 people, and it's like a single A baseball team, but it competes, but it still plays in the same division, because there's relegation, and then there's a whole entire spectrum of teams that you get from professional soccer in Europe. There's the top of the top, which is the Real Madrids of the world. These teams are pretty well known. Manchester United, really, really top teams that pay hundreds of millions of dollars to their players. And then you get the very bottom ones that are like the Boston Rovers, who have a salary of a couple, like $35,000 for their whole entire team every year. Like, that's how much they put into it. All they do is the only thing they pay for is they pay salaries of about $35,000 a year, and comparable to US, and then they travel costs on top of that. And so all these teams are just so there's a whole spectrum, and it's way free market, because the big teams pay smaller teams a lot of money for their players. And so the big teams go, when they develop something, when a small team develops a really good player, the big teams are willing to pay them really good cash to get them up to them. And so there's a whole spectrum, a whole competition. And in the United States, it's very limited. We only have 30 teams.
One thing I kind of want to get into, as you brought up, is maybe that disparity in pay. Are we selling youth today a bill of goods? There's the valid criticism that sports ball, as some people refer to it, it's a modern day Roman bread and circuses, that we're distracting the populace, and we're sacrificing our youth to this machine with these promises of grandeur. They're going to make all this money, but where maybe that wouldn't be valid in a free society, like you said. In a more open society, some people just don't get paid, and they're not needing there. As well as just the simple fact that in the United States, the odds of a kid's making it there isn't there, and that there's the dangers of it. President Obama recently come out and said that he wouldn't allow his son to play football because it's so dangerous, and that we're selling these kids that it's a way to get rich and to get that way. But I just kind of don't feel that that's a valid criticism. For one, I played football, and I did a lot of stupid stuff as a young boy. It was just fun and for the excitement of it. I wasn't there to necessarily to make money. I knew, I mean, every boy I think dreams of going on to professional sports at some point a little bit, but I think the realism really kicks in and you acknowledge you're not going to make that. I mean, for me, if there's any extrinsic motivation other than it was just fun, I did it for the ladies, Cheerleaders always dated the captain of the football team and the quarterback. So that was kind of maybe one of my goals in playing sports. Do you think that's a valid criticism? That it's just actually it's a distraction created by the government to cull the masses?
I don't think that at all. I think sports are.
Is there a real market demand for professional sports?
Yeah, I think psychologically we want to see people. We enjoy seeing people doing great things athletically. There's definitely a psychology to watching people do amazing slam dunks in basketball, or catching an amazing one-hand catch, something that you haven't seen before, that pushing the human body to its limits. When people do something amazing with the human body, it's amazing.
I mean, I think there's an inspiration factor there to be had.
And and in the entertainment industry, the interesting thing is television and entertainment. It's a live event, and live events that are unpredictable have something to them that you don't know what's going to happen. You have no way of knowing the future of how a sports team will do in what game they're going to be in. The unpredictability of watching a sports game, to me, is something that you want to watch. You don't know if your team's going to win or not. You don't know these things before you go in. You don't know what the score is going to be, and that that unpredictability is also extremely important. And people don't realize that is something that you can watch a lot of comedies and you'll know exactly how it's going to end. That everyone at the end is just going to be fine, but you watch it because it's funny. But there's a lot of entertainment out there that is predictable. That we all know the superhero movies are really predictable right now. You know that the superhero is going to have some problem that they go, and then at the end you have an idea that they're going to triumph in some way, shape, or form over it.
Oh, definitely. I think it's definitely a source of the greatest unscripted drama you can have. There's nobody that knows the outcome of the game. I mean, definitely you can make educated guesses and predictions, but it's definitely there's that entertainment factor. And I think to deny that there's not market demand that would support this without government subsidies is being myopic and I think a little bit naive of just the passion and the hopes that people have. I think it's very cynical to just think that it's a completely government created, control mechanism through people. I think it works because it is entertaining. There is that factor that we naturally as humans are drawn to it. Yeah, it's just like anything else that people often argue against and they want banned and gotten rid of is that, in the wrong hands, anything can be used for wrong. And I definitely don't think sports is that way. Even with the idea of bread and circuses and that it can distract us from those things. And in a lot of ways, I think it has served more good than bad, even in its current state. And I think in a free market situation and in a voluntary society, it would even be even healthier and even more beneficial to benefiting society and making people live more full and reasonable lives.
Well, we can always go into that, but that there's always going to be really crappy situations for people throughout the world, and sports is a really good getaway for them. And that's something I've always criticized about like 9/11 is that sports events didn't start for another week after that. They stopped it from happening, and it put people way more focused on that than they should have ever been. That maybe a little distraction in their lives at that point would have been good, because a lot of depression and all that started setting in over these type of things. Sports are a really good distraction to just get away from things in a lot of ways.
That's very true. I mean, even from a personal experience, I grew up playing high school football. We played high school football. We had one of my good friends and teammates came down with leukemia. That wasn't due to playing football. That's, whatever other odds and factors factored into that. It's probably hard to say, regardless of whether or not football was around, he was going to contract leukemia. Mm-hmm. But the team rallied around him, and actually the whole community did. And that was a healing and bonding moment for me and a real growth experience for me in life as we rallied and we played on behalf of that teammate as he was out for the rest of the season. That we rallied him, even won a state championship, and reunited the community that had been that was pretty divided actually prior to that season. And then later on, there I've seen also things where youth and kids pass away, and even rival schools will step in and they'll offer condolences to people. That it's actually a way to make society more cooperative. It's on a voluntary basis, not on some sort of tinfoil hat like conspiracy of the government.
Look at South Carolina and LSU last week. I mean, LSU did beat the tar out of South Carolina, but if you saw theirs on TV, they like had billboards like "Welcome South," because they moved the game to LSU because South Carolina had their floods that happened to them, and the whole community in South Carolina was in disarray at that point. And they moved the whole entire sporting event over to LSU, and LSU is like, "Welcome South Carolina fans, welcome," and it was all over, like way welcome, and it was all about people getting help for those who needed it in that really bad circumstance. And the football game was probably a great way to look away from it, to like get it out of their heads for a little while, that they're in this awful situation.
That's definitely. I think you may say maybe there's not enough profit there, but I think people do rally around those. There's definitely a case to be great charity fundraisers, and like I said, there's a plethora of cases in which sports have helped people overcome tragedy. I mean, you think about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and what it meant when the New Orleans Saints won the Super Bowl later. A lot of people held that as kind of a sign and a symbol that the city was finally getting over that tragedy. Because I mean, especially if you think back on the images as they zoomed in on, maybe it was a tax subsidized building, that's the Superdome, and the tragic pictures of that to years later, and how they had kind of overcome that through sports as well. And I think the interesting thing to me about that is there's, even in today, I think there's enough demand that there's already black markets in the sporting world that exist outside of that regulation. The demand is still strong enough there, even with our current system, that it still seeps out of the cracks into black markets. And we've talked a little bit about this in gambling. What are your thoughts on that and the black market nature that sports has evolved and always had, and how would that look maybe in a voluntary society?
Well, sports gambling is one of the reasons it's really popular. There's many around people who've gone around the system right now. The DraftKings.com and other ones that have put daily fantasy football, and you spend $5 on it and you can win $25 by having a really good fantasy football team that day. That DraftKings and those different websites that have started popping up to try to circumvent the system have brought in a lot of money, and they've really put in a lot of money back into the sports because they sponsored the sports leagues. You can watch people talk about it online. I saw the other day they wanted to keep in shape, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll do 10 push-ups every time a DraftKings or one of those commercials comes on now." And it's like, well, obviously there's a market for gambling on sports and men in a variety of different ways. And so there's that, and it's just going to continue. And Adam Silver wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. It's really good. I actually encourage almost everybody to read that about voluntarism, because that is interested in this stuff. Because he the commissioner, because the NBA used to be way against this, has come out in favor of legalization of sports gambling, because he thinks it being underground is a major problem, and he sees a huge revenue possibility for his league, and I don't blame him for that in any way, shape, or form. That he sees a whole entire gold mine possible for him. We talked about like that stadiums would be funded by aren't funded by taxpayers, but the leagues have no way of capitalizing on this right now. They have no way of capitalizing on sports gambling right now as they are. And if they could figure a way out how to get more money in through sports gambling, they're going to do that. And that's going to make a bigger impact, more money I think will come through sports gambling than almost any other form that's ever been in the NFL, NBA, any of that, because it's that big of a market that's not being tapped and not being.
I think thinking that the pro sports world would collapse without government subsidization is very much underestimating the creativity of the market.
Oh yeah.
And its ability to adapt and adapt. I think, yeah, sure, the government steps out and it takes its money with it, but it also gets out of the way of other revenue streams coming in. Like I said, we talked about gambling. I think boxing is a good example of this, because boxing takes place a lot of times at, hotel casinos in Vegas. It's all about, they've embraced the gambling nature that comes with boxing, and they hold them there in those casinos on those large fights, and it's thrived and done just well. And I think a similar system may arise, for sports. I mean, obviously we can't necessarily predict, the outcomes of a free market. I think oftentimes that's a tendency that we get caught up in, when the right argument says we don't know, because that would be the actual real answer. But it's still fun to speculate.
That's why we're here. We're speculating on it.
And different things as well. But is there any last things you want to?
No, I definitely think this article goes right on about it. Some really quotes have said that. A really good quote by Adam Silver: "As times have changed since PASPA, the anti-sports betting law has been enacted, gambling has increasingly become popular and accepted form of entertainment in the United States. Most states have lotteries. Over half of them have legal casinos. 3 have approved some form of internet gambling, and with others poised to follow." And he says there is an obvious appetite among sports fans for safe and a legal way to wager on professional sporting events. And you know what? He's right. a more transparent, legalized way of gambling would be way better than what we currently have, which is prohibition, and it's led to black markets, which keep things in the shadows, and there's less transparency. People aren't getting paid what they deserve. I mean, you could have a whole bunch of problems that happen because of this kind of thing.
Definitely. I mean, I might get into sports betting if I didn't have to worry about maybe my bookie coming in, breaking my leg or baseball bat or something like that. If it's more out in the open and I can shop among reputable bookies and maybe even reputable, agencies that track this, and they and it gets things more out in the open, and you don't necessarily have people throwing game and fixing games because it is more in the open. It's not pushed into the shadows. That gambling world back there, and I think that would be, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways is that, we get rid of some of that corporatization. We don't have the sports ball haters out there getting, taken for their money, their tax dollars. While at the same time, those of us that do enjoy sports, and maybe even the betting and some of the other side industries that come along with sports, we get a more open and transparent hobby basically to follow that is safer because of the competitions and the likes, that it's able to come out of the shadows and more into a legitimate market.
And that's definitely the case. I really think that's one of the most underrated things about sports is the gambling aspect. People sort of try to ignore it, but there's definitely a gambling aspect behind sports, and almost all sports. And there's the betting line, and when there's been innovation within even the gambling market to create these things such as DraftKings and that, there could be hundreds and hundreds of more different ways to gamble on sports that people have never thought about. Buying sports stocks, a whole bunch of other ideas that are out there that people would be willing to do, and it's fine for them. They can figure their way out how to gamble and figure it out how to do it in a really good way instead of being in the shadows like they are today. So I definitely think there's that, and we'd like to thank everyone for watching this show today.
Joining with us on our wild speculation about the market and what a voluntary society would look like. Feel free to chime in with some of your own speculation, or to counter maybe some of the points we've made as well. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, and also to maybe pitch in on what we should cover next, what we should go over, maybe speculate more on and try to describe how another issue might look in a more voluntary society.
Yeah, if you like what you saw, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like what you saw, give us a thumbs down. And comment what you didn't like, because we want to hear those things, because we want to get better at doing this. This is our first shot at doing this. We want to continue to get better and grow with our community, and grow our community as time goes on. So we're going to try to do weekly videos and try to get videos out on a weekly basis, so expect that as time goes on. Have a great day.